Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hilary Chiew. I'm from Third World Network. I suppose most of you all were following the morning session. Was there anyone who is new, who just joined this workshop? Yeah, just one person, is it? Okay, so maybe I just briefly go do a little bit of introduction what TWN is about. We are actually an international NGO. Some people call us think tank because we do policy analysis. And our work is mostly at the international policy making space. Our headquarters is actually in Penang. We originated from Penang. We also have two other sister organizations, Sahabat Alam Malaysia and Consumer Association of Penang, which you may be familiar with. So these are our two entities that work at the national level. So TWN, strictly speaking, we work at the international policy making space. But myself, being a Malaysian, so when I'm back in Malaysia, when I'm not following the negotiation, not attending negotiation, I'm doing also national work, right? So for instance, this is not really our national work, but we are helping the government as well, because the government has lacks of capacity, so we're also helping them in one of their obligation to the UNFCCC, which is the national communication. So maybe some of you all have heard about the national communication. So now we are in the process of producing our third national communication. So I'm one of their consultants. Okay, so that's, so I think what I will do is, most of you all, are your students? Could I have a show of hands who are students here? Okay, and the rest might be academician. Can I have a show of hand? Okay, so I think about half-half, right? And the rest, are they NGOs? NGOs? Okay, is there anyone else that is outside of these three categories? Can you identify yourself? Media, I'm sorry, okay. Actually, the key player today, how can I leave them out? My apologies. Okay, so I've been asked to talk about this process to production, but I think most of you all has experience of, or have some kind of a role to play in communication. So I feel that maybe what is very important to talk about this global change, I think we need to understand what is this global change we are talking about. That's why I'm going back to the issue of climate change. And of course, my area of expertise is in the international policy making space, and that is the agreement. So I'm going to, I have 10 slides. I'm going to run through what is these climate agreements, both UN, the Framework Convention, the Mother Treaty, the UNFCCC, and then the Kyoto Protocol, and of course a bit more attention on Paris Agreement, and then what Malaysia is doing, what is Malaysia's role in this Paris Agreement, and what are we doing at the national level? Would that be okay? Do you all think this would be necessary as a background? Okay, because I think, as I feel that our awareness level about this agreement is very low, so I think we need to have a little bit of background information on that, right? Okay, so a brief history about what is this global change that we are talking about, right? Of course, you heard about SDG, and before that is the MDGs, and then the Paris Agreement, right? Right, so the change is actually, when the world came together, all the countries, communities, NGOs and all that realized that we are facing a situation where our environment is deteriorating, okay? So what should we do? So because most of these environmental challenges is of global nature, right? So we need a collective efforts at the global level. So hence, all this global treaty and global agreement came about, right? So the landmark years, okay, these are the key ones. Of course, many works, a lot of people have done work before 1992. It didn't just came about, the environmental concern didn't just came about in 1992, right? So of course there was a build-up of issues, of concerns, a lot of discussion and negotiation. So then it culminates in 1992, okay? Some people describe this as the watershed year. This is when Rio took place, okay? The Earth Summit. Of course, it's in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. That's how it got the name Rio. And then after that, this is the discussion about sustainable development. Then the 10 years after that, they have another meeting in Joburg. And then in 2012, there was another meeting again, and this time back in Rio, and they call it Rio Plus 20, okay? And what happened in Rio 92, okay? So why is it a watershed year? That is the year where country got together and say that, okay, we have this environmental crisis, right? So the three main environmental crises that they identify is the loss of biodiversity, climate change, and desertification. Okay. So out of these three, UNCCD, that is the Convention to Combat Desertification, is the one that is getting the least attention. Okay, UNFCCC and CBD are very high priority, but particularly UNFCCC. So Rio 92 is a watershed because the world came together and said that we cannot continue development in this manner, like what we used to have. So we need a paradigm shift. And this paradigm shift is not just about how we develop our economy, but it's also a paradigm shift that says that there is a common but differentiated responsibilities. Because many of these problems at that time in 1992, right, the environmental degradation is caused in some way because of the developed country, how they have developed in the past and how they have exploited the resources in developing countries through colonization, you know, and later on, of course, through the economic progress where they invest and they extract resources from developing country. So we are saying that we are facing this environmental crisis, but as developing country, we are actually at the receiving end of all the bad things, right? Our environment has deteriorated, our water has been polluted, okay? Our resources been extracted and, you know, timber and whatnot, right? Of course, many of you will probably remember the anti-tropical timber campaign, right? So we are arguing that, you know, while NGOs here are campaigning against our government for destroying our forests, but there is another dimension that was around the time, late 80s and early 90s, that we realized that this came about not just because our government is bad, or we have very poor policy, but it also because of the demand from the developed world for all these resources, and they are paying pittance for all these kind of resources. So there is a shift, the paradigm shift that we are, that was very much part of the highlights in Rio. And of course, some of you may remember how Mahathir was played a prominent role as well in Rio. And so of course the CBDR and all that, all these strong developing country at that time, and also including Malaysia, under the leadership of Mahathir, that we have argued and we have very successfully got this principle enshrined both in UNFCCC as well in CBD. Okay. So then, well, when we talk about sustainable development, the terms that you will hear is like this three-pillar thing, you know, the three Ps. What are these three Ps? Planet, people, and profit, right? And of course, in other ways, we call it economic, social, and the other E is environment, actually. Okay. Environment, social, and economy. So you're talking about a balance. Sustainable development is about these three pillars, and how do you balance these three pillars, okay? And then I'm going to concentrate more on climate change, as I said earlier. And from the Rio in 1992, UNFCCC, they start their negotiation process, okay? So what happened after that, after 5 years, is in 1997, we arrived at an agreement called the Kyoto Protocol. This basically is the supplementary treaty to UNFCCC. Okay, UNFCCC is the mother convention, okay, with all the big principles and provision. And Kyoto Protocol is actually a treaty that will actually operationalize the convention, some of the provision of the convention. Okay, that's Kyoto. And then, of course, then the famous Paris Agreement in 2015. And the SDGs replaces the MDGs, right, from 2015 to 2030, and then together with the SDG is this 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Okay, so far, is there any question? Okay, we'll move on, huh? Right. So UNFCCC and SDG both are very highly political arena, okay? Many developing countries, and these are the things, is very political because there's this division between developed and developing. Remember the paradigm shift in 1992. We're saying that developing country, yes, we have all this environmental problem. We need to solve our environmental problem. We have to stop our habitat loss. We have to protect our biodiversity. But how do we do it when at the same time we need to develop, right? You developing country, your NGOs, they are shouting, telling us not to cut down our forests, but we need to develop as well, right? We can't just live on air and sunshine, you know. So, but there is a limit to development. That the developing country, they do agree and they do see the need for it because it is good for them also in the long run. You can't keep on exploiting your resources like there's no tomorrow. Because if you really do that, there will be no tomorrow for you, you know? So they recognize that it's highly political, and in UNFCCC, there is a division of developed and developing country. We call them the Annex 1 and the non-Annex 1. So Annex 1 basically is just a list, you know, we call it Annex, right? Of developed countries, and the non-Annex 1 are basically the developing countries. At the moment now, there are 196 member states in UNFCCC, okay? And in this convention, both CBD and UNFCCC, as I mentioned earlier, the CBDR principles are clearly enshrined there. So it stands for common but differentiated responsibility, recognizing the fact that this environmental crisis is a common responsibility, but because of our, if you like, our contribution to this problem is different, right? Whether we are a consuming state or we are a producing state, you know? Most of the time, at that point in time, 1992, most of the developing countries are actually the producing states, okay, producing countries, okay. So then throughout the years, you have the Mother Convention. Throughout the years, like in KP, Kyoto Protocol and then Paris Agreement, this is treaties that is going to operationalize all these principles and provisions. When you talk about CBDR, how are you going to operationalize CBDR? No? All right, so under UNFCCC, member state has been meeting every year. Okay, they call it the Conference of Parties. Parties because if you are a signatory, these are legal jargon, so you are a party to that convention, right? So it's COP. And then for UNFCCC, because the issue of climate change is so critical that UNFCCC meets every year. CBD, they meet alternate years, okay? And on top of the annual COP, or you call it the annual summit, because that's when the decision will be taken, okay? There is also an intersession, and the intersession meeting usually takes place either May or June. And it will take place in Bonn, because Bonn is the headquarters of the convention, okay? All right. And Kyoto Protocol, as I said, was adopted in 1997. And it entered into force only in 2005. So you can see that it takes so long, you know, after you have negotiated, it took so long for it to enter into force. Because it needs, I think, 2/3 of the parties to sign up and to ratify, right? And of course, the US never ratified the Kyoto Protocol, you know? And so it only entered into force in 2005, right? And for phase 1, from 2008 to 2012, the emission cut. So basically, Kyoto Protocol is about emission cut, because the climate crisis is because of we are pumping a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So we need to stabilize that. That is actually the objective, right? The ultimate objective of the UNFCCC is to stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, okay? And For the phase 1, the emission cut is only 5% from 1990 levels, and the obligation to cut is only on developed countries, okay, Annex 1 countries, right? This is their obligation. And then we have the phase 2 now. We're actually in the phase 2 time, but the phase 2 has not entered into force yet, okay? And as you can see there, phase 2 is 2013 to 2020. We only have 3 more years before phase 2 ends. And this Kyoto Protocol phase 2 has not come into force. You know, this is really troubling because after 2020, come 2021, all countries, developed or developing, you will have to take on emission reduction. So that means there is a very big possibility, whatever that you cannot do in phase 2, you're going to transfer it into the developing countries. Because developing countries are developing so fast. They are the ones that really need to cut their emission to make any sense, you know, if we want to address climate change. So there is an issue of equity now, as in like, whose responsibility is this? If phase 2 doesn't kick in as soon as possible, then the responsibility will be transferred to developing country. So that the issue of fairness and equity, right? So that is the reason why the negotiation is very difficult at this UNFCCC process. And phase 2 is 18% from 1990 levels. And it was actually a huge compromise from developing country to get developed country to agree to phase 2, okay? So they agree at 18%, but there is actually a condition that they will review this ambition target in 2014, okay? 2014 came and went, developed country did not agree to increase their percentage of emission reduction, okay? Okay, I'll go on. Is there any question, any clarification? Right, so Paris Agreement 2015. Right, it's a 16 pages agreement, contain 29 articles, and it's adopted as an annex. So every COP, as I said, they will make decision, right? So the agreement itself is annexed to this decision called Decision 1 CP21. CP21 stands for COP21, okay? And there are many, many decisions, Decision 1, Decision 2, Decision 3, but Decision 1 is a key one now, okay? So, as I mentioned earlier, this is universal participation. Universal participation here actually is a word that refers more to mitigation, because even under Kyoto regime, right now we are under the Paris Agreement regime, come 2021. Under Kyoto Protocol regime, there is also universal participation. It's just that the message that's being put out there is like, developing countries are not doing anything for climate change. That's not true, because we don't have obligation under KP, right? So our quote-unquote obligation under KP is to help the developed country that cannot meet their emission target, and they can outsource their action to us. I guess probably some of you will heard about Clean Development Mechanism, CDM projects. So that is actually a facilitative mechanism, a flexible mechanism to help developing countries to meet their paltry 5% emission reduction. You know, 5%. I mean, if you look at it, it's a crisis. You know, how can you just cut 5%? Right. So universal participation now, the emission reduction obligation of all, will come through what they call this thing called the nationally determined contribution. Now, I underline nationally determined because the convention and then now the treaty, the sub-treaties, all that has been very considerably weakened. Previously, it was an obligation and very, very clear commitment. You know, the word contribution was what developed country can accept, and also developing country to a certain extent. Because if you put the word commitment there, everybody is so worried. You know? The commitment has, in the legal jargon, the commitment has much more, a stronger meaning. So they do not want the word commitment. So the word contribution came. So it's nationally determined. That means it is, I decide how much I want to cut. Okay? There's no more like under the Kyoto Protocol regime where it was top-down, you decide, at that point in time was 5%, then you distribute this obligation among those parties that has to do the emission cut, which was the developed country then. Okay. So in terms of mitigation, so there is a 5-year cycle. So now, so every 5 years, you have to submit a new NDC, okay, nationally determined contribution. So, and in that NDC, you must show that you are making progression, okay? Even though it's pledge and review, and we are not happy with it because it's nationally determined, right? If it's such a, you know, if we recognize that climate change is a crisis, it cannot be nationally determined. We have to tell a lot of countries that you probably need to cut 50%, you know, and not your 18% or 24%, you know, because that is not going to help us to stabilize the climate change situation. And then they also talk about peaking. So peaking means that you agree by certain year, your emission is not going to grow anymore. You will be able to bring down your emission by whatever means, okay? Replacing your coal with solar, for instance, you know? And then maybe do agroecology instead of all this farming that use a lot of fertilizer that contributes to this nitrogen oxides emission, because that is a greenhouse gas as well. And Paris Agreement, what is significant or got people really excited is that they say a country agree to keep temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, yeah, which is 2100, okay? And they will pursue to limit the temperature rise to 1.5, okay? Well, someone in the audience, I think it was Claire this morning, said that we are definitely going to hit 1.5, okay? I think she is quite right there. And this is what they call the long-term temperature goal. So these are what the country has agreed to. But even as country adopt Paris Agreement, in the Decision 1 CP21, I think Anil raised the question whether we are able to meet the target of 2 degrees Celsius. And I don't think he got an answer in the morning. But I'll tell you this, Anil, is bad news. Paragraph 17 of Decision 121 says, notes with concern that the estimated aggregate greenhouse gas emissions levels in 2025 and 2030 resulting from the INDC do not fall within least cost 2 degrees Celsius scenarios, but rather lead to a projected level of 55 gigatons in 2030, and also notes that much greater emission reduction efforts will be required than those associated with the INDC contributions in order to hold the increase in the global average temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level by reducing emission to 40 gigatons or to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by reducing to a level to be identified in the special report referred to in paragraph 21 below. Okay, the IPCC is also a political arena. So IPCC is going to come up with a special report, right? We are going to look at the special report next year, and that will be a big fight again there. Okay. And right, so next year, together with the IPCC report, special report about whether we are able to contain temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, what are the things that we need to do in order to achieve that target? There is also a facilitative dialogue. Okay. The facilitative dialogue here, where party decides to convince a facilitative dialogue among parties in 2018 to take stock of the collective efforts of parties in relation to progress towards the long-term goal. The long-term goal is 2 degrees Celsius or to pursue 1.5, right? Referred to in Article 4.1, that is the mitigation article of the agreement. And then to inform the preparation of nationally determined contributions. So that special report and the facilitative dialogue, which will take stock of what countries are doing, then they will inform the next NDCs. Because earlier on we talked about 5-year cycle, the NDC will be 5-year cycle from now. Okay. And then there will be a global stocktake again in 2023. So that is to facilitate 2025 when countries submit their next round of NDCs. Okay. And that will supposed to carry on every 5 years. Okay, in the Paris Agreement also, there's this enhanced transparency framework. Okay, what is transparency framework under the UNFCCC? It's about how member states tell the international community what they are doing in terms of combating climate change. Okay, so climate change is not just about combating climate change is not just about mitigation. Okay, it's also about adaptation, right? And so in this transparency framework, we are supposed to communicate. So there is this process called the national reporting, which is the document that we will submit to UNFCCC is called the national communication. As I mentioned earlier, we are now into the national communication 3, the third one, supposed to submit by end of the year or early next year. Different country has different approach to this national communication because they all start at different starting point. So some are into their third communication already, and some are still with their first, their initial national communication. Okay, but then they can report like for a 7-year period or for a 10-year period to catch up. Okay, right. So in this report, what are we supposed to tell the international community? So we have a GHG inventory. That's called greenhouse gas inventory. So you will tell the international community for your XXXXX sectors, how much are you emitting? Okay, so that is transparency. And then you also have to report what are your mitigation efforts. And your mitigation efforts, what are the effects from your mitigation efforts? How much GHG are you actually reducing? VNA is vulnerability and adaptation. So it's not just about mitigation, because we are already feeling the impacts. Many countries are feeling the impacts, including the developed countries themselves. That's why they are also very interested in UNFCCC, because they are feeling the impacts as well. So they also want all of you all, developing country, to make sure that you cut, so that you would not destroy what they have developed for themselves. Okay. And also level of support received, because as I say about the CBDR, right? So we have differentiated responsibility. So when we take on responsibility, the developed countries has agreed to provide means of implementation. So Prof. Gudial this morning mentioned about means of implementation. So in short, in negotiation, we call it MOI. Okay. So countries, developed countries are supposed to give financial support, technology transfer, and capacity building, okay, to developing country. So then in order to be transparent, what we have received, we will have to report to the international community what we have received. So this is what we call level of support received. All right, and Paris Agreement, another very interesting features in Paris Agreement is this recognition of the concept loss and damage. Okay, what is loss and damage? Is that when you are in a situation where you cannot adapt anymore to the impacts of climate change, you are facing a situation of loss of your natural resources, of your ability to develop, and even existential threat. Meaning, if you are a country at the forefront of climate change impact, for example, if you are an island state or you are low-lying, your country has a lot of low-lying coastal area, you are vulnerable. You are highly vulnerable, and you will incur losses, right, to your national asset, your natural assets, and probably you will be so damaged that you cannot even use those assets anymore. For example, if you are an island state, probably your island will be lost to the sea, and you may have to migrate. So the issue of like climate refugees, the terms climate refugees come up, right? But in Paris Agreement, even though they recognize the concept of loss and damage, which has been negotiated for a long, long time actually, there is a trade-off. Okay. We have Article 8, which is deals with loss and damage, but we also have this para 51 in the decision 1 CP21. This one is a short one. Okay. Party agrees that Article 8 of the agreement, Article 8 is loss and damage, does not involve or provide a basis for any liability or compensation. Okay. So there's no liability clause here. You cannot hold the developed country responsible for the loss of your territory, the loss of your indigenous culture, your traditional practices and all that, right? So it's a huge trade-off. And very interestingly, when a lot of these countries, LDC, small island states, when they sign up and ratify Paris Agreement, they actually had, what should I say, a clause that says that this paragraph does not prohibit me from seeking compensation or seeking any kind of corrective action in future. So they put that in their document, their instrument where they submit when they ratify the Paris Agreement. So this fight is not over yet. Yeah. And another article that is very important in Paris Agreement is the Article 3. So this is an article that, in a way, help us to preserve Article 4.7 of the Convention. Article 4.7 of the Convention is very, very critical. It's the most, in some way, most sacred article for a lot of developing countries, because this is the article that recognizes that the extent to which developing country will address climate change will depend on the extent to which developed country will provide means of implementation. So if you don't give me money, legally speaking, I don't have to do anything, right? But of course, if everyone sign on to Paris Agreement, you can't say you are not going to do anything anymore. You have agreed in principle to do something, right? But of course, you can put in a condition, which is what most countries have done. They put in a condition when they ratify Paris Agreement. Okay, so Article 3 is fought very, very hard by a group of developing country called themselves the Like-Minded Developing Country, LMDC. Okay. So I'll just, please bear with me, I'll just read this out. As NDC to the global response to climate change, all parties are to undertake and communicate ambitious efforts as defined in Articles 4, which is for mitigation, 7 is for adaptation, 9 is finance, 10 is technology transfer, Article 11 is capacity building, and 13 is transparency, with a view to achieving the purpose of this agreement as set out in Article 2. Article 2, of course, is that long-term temperature goal, capping it at 2 degrees Celsius. And the efforts of all parties will represent a progression over time. So no backsliding. You have to do better. All right? Every NDC, you have to show that you are doing better. And while recognizing the need to support developing country parties for the effective implementation of this agreement. Okay? The need to support developing country. So that is Article 3, and that preserves Article 4.7. And Paris Agreement, after November 2015, so a lot of countries has started to sign up. And then we hear when we go for negotiation, the one after Paris in May 2016, is no longer early entry into force. The word that they use is rapid entry into force, because a lot of countries are signing up. So on 5th October 2016, the thresholds were met, 2 thresholds, 55% of global emission and 55% of the member states, okay? So they met both thresholds. The last one, of course, is the 55% global emission on 5th October. So 30 days after they met the threshold, the agreement entered into force. So 4th November, it entered into force, just before the COP 22 in Marrakesh took place, okay? And that resulted, because it has already entered into force, so we need to have, to convene the conference of the parties to the Paris Agreement. So in short, CMA. CMA 1 was held alongside COP 22. So COP 22 is the UNFCCC COP. That was last year in Marrakesh. And then, of course, around that time, during the Marrakesh negotiation, the US just gone through their election, the presidential election. So there were a lot of rumors that Trump is going to withdraw. But true enough, he withdrew, but he withdrew on June 2nd, right? And in any case, they never joined Kyoto Protocol. And now they are withdrawing from Paris Agreement. But the withdrawal is not immediate. You see, under the Paris Agreement, you have to follow a process in order to withdraw, right? So, and Obama ratified the Paris Agreement, I think sometime in, during the G20 in Hangzhou, together with China. I think they ratified Paris Agreement. I think sometime in the summer, about a year ago, they ratified. So, in order for them to withdraw, for a party member states to withdraw, regardless whether it's USA or whoever, as long as you are a member state, if you want to withdraw, you have to wait for 3 years. You have to wait for 3 years for after the Paris Agreement has entered into force. With 3 years from 4th of November means 3rd November 1999. And then, only after 3 years you can submit your letter that you want to withdraw. And then after that, it will take 1 year for that letter to come into effect. So technically, US is still pretty much in the negotiation, is still in the picture, and they're going to mess up the negotiation again. Okay. And then after the US withdrawal, of course, it has been condemned by a lot of countries, including China, right? And China said they will not retract from Paris Agreement, they will go ahead, right? And of course, they found allies in the EU that say, China, you're very good, you know, we'll go ahead, we'll be the global leader. So China assuming global leadership, right? Right, so the Malaysia situation, where we are, okay? So we are one of the 196 member states of UNFCCC. We are a member of Kyoto Protocol. We have also ratified a Paris Agreement. So we are actually, in terms of global emission, we are contributing 0.5%. Okay? In 2000, we are actually a net sink. This is according to our second national communication. Net sink means your emission is actually covered by the removal. Removal is done by the forest. So there's a formula to calculate how much our forests are sequestering, okay? And when you do the calculation, in 2000, we were actually a net sink. So we are not an emitter yet. But in 2011, BUR stands for Biennial Update Report. Besides the national communication now, which is every 4 years we have to report, there's also the other reporting requirement, which is called the Biennial Update Report. It's updating what you have said in your previous NC. So in the first BUR in 2011, it says 2011, that's our emission. The removal is that figure, okay? So we are actually now a net emitter. In 2011, we are already a net emitter. We are now 2017. The BUR was submitted last year, okay? Right. So what have we been saying to the international community about what we're going to do, we are willing to do? In COP15 Copenhagen, Prime Minister Najib, he says that we're going to cut our emission by 40% intensity of the GDP, okay? The word intensity and per GDP is very important. I think this is one place where a lot of people couldn't differentiate. They would just say 40%. The media in particular, no matter how many times we told them this is emission intensity, they still report emission 40%. Okay, right. I mean, that goes to show that how much they really pay attention to this kind of wordings. These are very, very important wordings. Huh? Okay, and we submitted our INDC in November 2015 before Paris. And we say in our NDC, we will do 45% emission intensity, okay? 35% emission intensity, we will do it on our own, using our own resources, right? But 10%, we are conditioning it on the MOI, means of implementation, finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. Right, so a lot of countries went to New York on 22nd April to sign the Paris Agreement. Okay, few months after Paris, right? It was open, and there was a big event. Many countries were there, and they signed. And we ratified it 11 November, okay? So, and sometime this year, we also ratified the second commitment period of Kyoto Protocol, okay? This is like almost forgotten by the rest of the world already. Even Malaysia were very reluctant to ratify second commitment period of Kyoto Protocol for some very strange reason. Probably someone will poorly advise at the ministry. So because they think that Kyoto Protocol is not important anymore. But as I say, Kyoto Protocol is very important because if Kyoto Protocol don't enter into force soon enough, we have 3 more years before 2020, then all the actions that need to be done pre-2020 will be transferred to post-2020, and guess who is going to bear the burden of doing all this emission cut? Most likely it will be developing countries, including Malaysia. Okay? So strategically, we as a country, we are not really strategic in our thinking, you know. Like for example, before Paris Agreement, we go and tell the whole world we are able to do 33% emission cut without any help. Even though in Copenhagen, Najib said we will do 40% with help, you know. Then he goes and tell the whole world later, look at us, we are so good, 33%, we don't need any help, you know. So, I don't know, are we shooting ourselves in our foot, you know? So, anyway, so they did that, and they only ratified the second commitment period just a few months ago, okay? That is also after a lot of noises being made. I mean, my sister organization has written letter to the ministry, and then we have wrote to media and said that, Malaysia, you're really stupid, you don't want to ratify second commitment period, you know. What are you thinking, you know? This is pre-2020, is so important. If we are telling developed country, hey, your 18% is not enough, you need to ratchet up your ambition, and here we are, supposed to push the entry into force of the second commitment period, and we are not ratifying it. How are we going to justify this? How are we going to say, we don't have moral ground anymore to ask the developed country to ratify second commitment period, and we don't do it? Because we need more than 2/3 of the country for the second commitment period to enter into force. And then developed country is only like 30, 40 of them, you know. The rest of it will have to come from developing country. So, but at the moment now, there are only 79 countries that has ratified second commitment period. Okay. Well, Malaysia is trying to seek fund through the GCF, that is the Green Climate Fund, that is the primary operating entity of the financial mechanism. So there are two financial mechanisms of the UNFCCC. One is the Global Environment Facility, and the other one that has been created is Green Climate Fund. Okay. And we are trying to get money for our RED Plus result-based payment. Okay. Result-based payments means we are able to show result that we have kept our forest. Our forest is a sink, and therefore we need to be compensated. Because remember earlier I said, you know, the paradigm shift, right? We need to develop. We are still developing. We need to cut our forest, for instance, for example, right? To develop our furniture industry and to create jobs, right? Foreign exchange, whatnot, right? To grow our economy. But if we have kept our forest, because in 1992, right, we pledged that we will keep our forest cover at 50%. So we are doing our part, but we realize that, you know, now the world realized that forest is so important as a sink, right? So we have sacrificed our development and we kept our forest, so we should be compensated. So anyway, we negotiated this and we got it. We got RED Plus in 2010 in Cancun. So RED Plus was there. And besides RED Plus result-based payment, we are also seeking fund. There's a readiness fund for developing country to strengthen the institutional arrangement, okay? And then to help them to identify and develop projects that could mitigate climate change. So, and RED Plus, the process in Malaysia itself has gone quite advanced. The country has submitted what you call the forest reference level, means showing that how much forest we have kept, how much carbon we have, and how much we should be compensated. Right? And then NAP is a National Adaptation Plan. They are also hoping to get money from GCF to do the NAP. And then TNA is a Technology Needs Assessment. This is through the UNEP to do a study to identify what are your technology, your climate technologies that you need to mitigate and also to adapt. Is there any question? Clarification? All right, what else have we done at the national level? Okay, vulnerabilities assessment. NARIM as the primary agency in charge of water resources, I mean from the climate change perspective, they have done climate projection study, and covering like rainfall pattern and sea level rise. And they have developed a national coastal vulnerability index. Okay, MARDI from the agriculture sector, they have looked at the vulnerability of the main crop, and mostly like rice. Then the Rubber Research Institute also look at rubber, and then cocoa, palm oil as well. And the Ministry of Health, they have done studies, quite preliminary, I would say, because it is not that easy to do all this kind of study. You need a lot of climate projection, modeling, and whatnot, you know. and it requires interdisciplinary approaches. They have done that on vector diseases. What you can think of, like your dengue and your malaria. Okay. We have done an economics of climate change. This is like model after the economics of climate change done by the UK government, the famous one. Okay. That study focused on water and rice production. Okay. In terms of policy that is relevant to climate change, Malaysia has recognized renewable energy as a fifth fuel, has included that in the 8 Malaysia plan. And then we have the climate change policy, and then the National Green Tech Policy, both are in 2009. And then the Renewable Energy Policy and Act in 2011, National Energy Efficiency Action Plan, which has just been approved last year, right? And measures, okay, maybe KETA shouldn't be there, but anyway, I'll explain why KETA is there. KETA is because in 2009, there was a cabinet reshuffle, and then this ministry was created, right, with more focus on energy and then green tech. And it created the Green Tech Corporation, and the Renewable Energy Act that came in also facilitated this, the feed-in tariff projects. Okay? And then we have the Sustainable Energy Development Authority and the Green Tech Financial Scheme, EE Action Plan. Okay, sorry, this one because I cut and paste from another presentation. So this is not pending anymore. This has already been adopted in 2016. And then there are other initiatives like low carbon cities and fiscal incentives. Okay. Institutional arrangement-wise, we have the National Climate Change Steering Committee, and then the Green Tech and Climate Change Council, which is chaired by the Prime Minister. But they hardly meet, they only meet like once a year. You know. We don't really know what they're doing. Okay, so I'm done with the overview and the brief history. So is there any question there? Any burning question on that? Okay, otherwise I'll just carry on, yeah? Yeah, I think I only have just 2 more slides. Okay, this is actually the meat of our workshop today, chasing the stories, right? So, I felt that the media work, and you know, we talk about like generating stories and what are actually stories. Fundamentally, it is about serving societal or national interests. Okay. So I think if we have that fundamental thoughts or fundamental thing that is guiding us, I think we will not go wrong. So the whole idea about media and reporting about all this global change issue is about how we can make our society better, how we can serve our society better. And of course, because it is an international treaty, you also have to look into the national interests. Okay? Right. So it's very, for me, it's very basic, right? Journalism is 5W1H. You just need to ask all these questions and answer all these questions. Okay, in your reporting, in your writing, right? And it has to be informative. Right? Okay, you have to tell people, maybe you explain to people what is climate change impacts, what is sea level rise, okay, the science, maybe, right? And maybe to a certain extent, we have to take on a more advocacy role, because these are very complex issues. Most of the time, your editors are not interested. Most of the time, the editors in the newsroom are people who have probably never gone to university. During my time, most of them do not have a degree. So they find this kind of issue very difficult. This is not to run them down or to paint them in a bad light, but that is the reality of newsroom. During my time, like about 20 years ago, that's the reality. You have an editor who don't even know what is the meaning of advocacy, no? So that, I think we have to realize that going forward, maybe because the issue is so complex and it's difficult, I think we, as journalists, maybe we have to take on this, you know, a campaign kind of approach to push something, push the issue. Right? So the global change story can take all kinds of dimension. I think Adrian asked a question about what is the benefit of us, talking about this politic of negotiation? What does it serve? Do people care? You know, I think it's a valid question, but I would say people should care. And our challenge is how we make people care, right? And I think it's about how we tell the story, okay? It's just like how I went through the 10 slide and telling the story of politics, of negotiation. I think it is an interesting story. I think I'm not alone here that thinks that it's interesting. I think there probably, I see a few people nodding their head that it's interesting. It's just a matter of how we tell the story, right? And it is an important story, right? Okay. So I do think that the politics of negotiation is an important story to tell. And then we have to tell the story about mitigation, how we are implementing our Renewable Energy Act, okay? How are we adopting solar? How well is FIT doing or not doing? What are the problems with FIT? Okay, what are the challenges? And adaptation, okay? Are we ready for sea level rise? Okay. Are we able to handle all these extreme weather events that are getting more frequent now? Okay. Okay. And the impacts, these are the impacts, right? And policies, are our policies sound? Are they conflicting with each other? Okay. And public awareness. Oh, we hear things like about public apathy and all that, right? But I also hear very promising and very encouraging things that, in fact, I was interviewed by BFM. They asked me to comment about a survey done by Merdeka Review, Merdeka Center, I think, Merdeka Center. They did a survey on Malaysia, whether they are, they feel that we are very vulnerable to climate change. And the survey actually showed that a lot of Malaysians are very concerned about climate change. So on one hand, you have people, you say, apathy, but on the other hand, there are also very enlightened Malaysians, pretty well informed, I would say, that are concerned about climate change. Okay? Right, and participation. So maybe in this room, quite a number of you has participated in some kind of activities related to climate change. So awareness and participation will have to go hand in hand. So these are also stories that we could tell, okay? Right. And oftentimes you will find that all these issues are cross-cutting. They are multidisciplinary, okay? It's not very clear-cut that you just, when you talk about mitigation, you write about a mitigation story, it's just about mitigation story. Because when you look at the mitigation story, you also see the co-benefits from mitigation. Okay. For example, I'll give you an example. If you talk about reducing traffic, cutting down pollution from traffic, and taking cars from the roads, right? Public transportation, whatnot. The co-benefit is you get better air quality. Okay? Maybe you get a better social life as well. And maybe you get you have more money in your banks, you know, instead of serving your car loans, you have now more money in your pockets. And that will definitely give you a better quality of life. You know? You can enjoy more things in life, right? So that are the co-benefits. So it is not clear-cut, like, if you talk about one issue, it's just strictly that issue. There are a lot of cross-cutting matters involved, okay? And of course, journalism, as I said, serving the societal interest is about holding someone accountable. So in this case, it's holding our government, holding our authorities, and at the international space, it's about holding other governments as well accountable, right? Not just about Malaysia government, right? But of course, Malaysia government is negotiating. So if they are negotiating in a bad way, then we have to hold them accountable. Are you selling out my future or my children's future? Okay? So I think that's what we are talking about here, you know, holding someone accountable, right? And of course, in terms of policies, you know, perverse policies, right? And inconsistency in policy. Just now I list out all the policies. I'm sure they are not perfect. And I'm sure there's a lot of conflict among themselves. Maybe not with those policies that are listed, but maybe Red Plus will have conflict with a program called the Forest Plantation Program, you know? So that kind of inconsistency in policy, I think that is what we will have to call out too, okay? And of course, like wastage, when you have certain program or certain policy, how you are allocating your money to this, and are you really doing it in a very systematic or very prudent, efficient way. So I think those are the kind of stories that will be very interesting. So then, what do we do then? I think we heard a lot about the problems, the challenges that we will face in telling these stories, right? Coming from my own media background, and also what I said about the quality of our editors and the newsroom culture, I think what we need is nothing short of a reform, but is it really possible, given all the existing barriers that we have, political interference, media ownership, right? And the other thing is maybe in education, right? In formal, informal, and also at the tertiary level, okay? So this will probably require curriculum, changes in the curriculum in the education sectors, right? And well, if the newsroom is not going to budge, your mainstream media, even your alternative media, they are not going to do much about this. Can we, as concerned citizens, right, who are supposedly more enlightened, perhaps we are, and we could do something. We can be our own journalists, with social media and all this, right? And the phrase like citizen journalism, whatnot, okay? And also CSOs, which CSOs also use a lot of social media as well, and we use the traditional media. And how can we play a role in disseminating information? So it's not really all gloom and doom, but it's very, very challenging, right? So I think I'll leave you here. Thank you for your attention. I'm more than happy to take any questions, and we could maybe through the question we can discuss a bit more around the way forward. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any question for Miss Hilary? There's a mic here if you want to ask a question. No question? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious, before the policy, actually how they actually measure for that 2 degrees Celsius? For that 2 degrees Celsius, is it below 2 degrees Celsius? How actually they make that decision is 2 degrees Celsius?
Okay. Everything in the agreement has a long story behind it. Even this 2 degrees Celsius also has a long story, right? To put it very simply is, 2 degrees Celsius is not enough. No? That's why they said they will pursue 1.5, okay? But 1.5 is, we will try, to put it in very layman terms, is that we will try to keep it at 1.5, but we will definitely try harder to keep it at 2 degrees Celsius, But as I read out the paragraph 17, we are nowhere near 2 degrees Celsius. At the rate that we are all going, based on the INDC that countries have submitted before Paris, we will be 4 or 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Okay. How it came about is there's this thing called the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the scientific body that's supposed to advise the UNFCCC. Okay. So that IPCC itself is also very political, because the whole climate negotiation itself is not about environment anymore. It's about economy. It's about your competitiveness. It's about whether China will be the global leader, the superpower, or US will be the superpower, continue to be the superpower. Okay? It's all these things, all politics and geopolitics that is there. So the 2 degrees Celsius was decided actually in Cancun in 2010. So for us who follow the negotiation, the 2 big things in climate negotiation, one is the ambition, and the other one is the equity. Equity is how you differentiate the responsibility. So the CBDR principle, how you operationalize it. We lost the ambition fight because in Cancun, country translated that stabilizing the climate change, stabilizing concentration of climate change, concentration of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, we translate that into 2 degrees Celsius. So in Cancun, parties agree to 2 degrees Celsius already. Okay. The only thing that's different in Paris Agreement, you have that pursue 1.5 degrees Celsius. Okay. Right. So that it was a political decision to say 2 degrees. So it's not a scientific decision. IPCC said you have to do more, you know. So, and then now, of course, Paris 17, you know that you are not going to even contain it at 2 degrees if we continue like this, you know. Right. So, yeah, I hope I answer your question. So that was, yes.
Just like Hilary said, just to support that 2 degrees was an arbitrary, it was suggested by, I forget his name, and then they catched on to it. What's dangerous is when you think that we'll wait till 2 degrees and then bad things will happen. I think that's not how it is. It's like water boiling. It gets warmer and warmer slowly. It doesn't start cold and then suddenly it's boiling. All right? It gets warmer and we are basically in this hot water, right? So remember that this 2 degrees is just an arbitrary, politically decided target. Why? Okay, there is some basis because we figure we are now, 2016 we were at 1.1, all right? So we are now at 1.1 degrees of warming compared to 200 years ago, right? 2 degrees is what we figure. It's like if I take something and I load it on her, and I load it and load it and load it. At some point of time, she can't take it, she will collapse. They kind of figure the world's infrastructure cannot take beyond 2. They believe that after 2 or so, or by 2, things will start really collapsing. That's why they're saying that 2 is very dangerous, because countries like the Philippines and Bangladesh are already crying when they said 2, they said no way. Now already they're suffering. So many typhoons a year, right? Another thing, they cannot say 1.5 also as the maximum, because many of them already know 1.5 is inevitable. It's like you have paid 20 ringgit to go from here to Taiping, right? The bus is going to take you to Taiping even though you haven't reached Taiping yet. We have paid the 20 ringgit for 1.5, right? We're going to get there sooner or later. They're just arguing about the time. They're saying it's within 10 years. That's the latest, all right? What she said about what IPCC wrote, there are 4 scenarios in the last assessment report. 2.5 best case scenario to 7.8 by the end of the century, right? And then they calculated that, they said 4.5. Now the climate action tracker, they said with commitments, if fulfilled after Paris, we will still reach best case 2.8 degrees up to 3.6. So it's still not enough for Paris, right? They're saying, but according to current policies, we'll go, it's going to be difficult. With Paris, it'll be about 2.8. With the current policies, it can go up to 3.6. What we're saying is that we're not doing enough. Okay, long story cut short, we're not doing enough. We are playing with, we cannot say dangerous climate change. We're already in dangerous climate change now. We have to avoid catastrophic climate change. All right, tipping points after which they call it a runaway effect, meaning that it's just when the water starts getting hot, it doesn't go like this. It's hot, and suddenly gets very hot. All right, it's going to be like that. It's going to be bad food insecurity, water shortage, immense sea level rise. They can't even agree on how much. It varies so much, right? People, it can go up to 7 meters at 3 degrees, 4 degrees, all right? What I'm trying to say is that be prepared. It's going to get worse from year to year to year. It's not, oh, we are safe until we reach 2 degrees and then things are going to get bad. Things are going to get bad from year to year, right? Thank you.
So just now you mentioned about the policies that were put in place by the Malaysian government. So what kind of institutions can we look to hold those kind of things accountable? And as public citizens, how can we look to them? And I don't know if there is possible to be participatory, outlets for us to join, or even put pressure on the government to actually carry these things out.
I think for one is, as an individual, you can always write to the media. right? Or you can join some NGO or join some campaign. And also your member of parliament, your state assembly. I think it's high time that this issue is brought into the political arena as well. It is not that easy to sell to them, but I think we just have to keep trying, because I mean this is about survival, you know. This is about our future well-being. You know? So yeah, I guess that those are the few avenues that you could do. Maybe the youth have some brilliant ideas. Okay. Okay, they promise to share later. They're going to save the world later. Okay, just hold on.
From the way I hear it, it sounds very gloomy and there's nothing much we can do. I mean, it seems for media to even want to change the world, I think you can't even reform the newsroom. You got how many years some more before we even think of changing anything? Is there a story that can change anything at all? I was thinking that perhaps we need to think out the box rather than looking into how can we use the traditional media to get into, but what else can we do, not just on media, but a collaboration with different entities to do these things. I mean, it come to a point where I was watching another documentary where people resort to green anarchism, you know, green activists, which is so violent to even prevent this. That is the anger and emotion we're looking in the US. We call themselves what the Earth Liberation Front, and I thought that wow, that's so impressive, in certain sense that they're doing all these things over that side. I mean, it comes to one point where the anger and the emotion is there, but over here, I mean, from a Malaysian context, we haven't reached that point yet, right? And how do we play with that emotion, and how do we instigate that kind of emotion, which is something we can discuss about. But from my point of view, we haven't really get there yet. We do not feel any urgency from the younger generation. And I don't blame them, because with the way we are being brought up, with the way policies are being written, we bring young people towards a different direction. And looking into, like for example, education, even our Malaysian education blueprint has no mention about environment and things like that. They mentioned about entrepreneurship, making money and things like that, employability. So that is the focus, and we expect people graduating from university do not give an issue about issues like this being presented. So going back to what I think that we should do is really think out of the box, and with a limited time like this, it sounds pretty helpless to even think about something. I really hope the youth can think of something more aggressive to spur things up, isn't it? Start a revolution, or you even push for a green manifesto, so that in the next general election there are some green politicians who may want to propose something, or even a green movement or green politics that may be brought into our political era in Malaysia. Right, thanks.
Well, just to quickly respond to your last point about avenue, is that I understand I'm not promoting any particular faction or of the political divide or whatever. I think Pakatan, they are also inviting people, I don't know who they have reached out to give them ideas about, you know, from the environmental angle for their manifesto. So that's one. And of course, I'm expecting the next workshop session after this is going to produce some really green crusaders. But joke aside, maybe it's my fault I painted such a grey, gloomy picture, right? But I believe that in the next 3 years, there's still a lot that can be done. And before 2050, we are already seeing some very positive signs. Yeah? For instance, China said they will peak their emission around 2030. But now there are reports coming out suggesting that they're going to peak much earlier than that. So that is really positive, right? And of course, you know, China is very aggressive, going out to the rest of the world with their One Belt, One Road. I mean, we are one of the country, you know, under One Belt, One Road. I mean, we can also demand clean energy from China. I mean, that's how we should approach this kind of international policy from China. So this is where we can tell our government, you know, that, hey, you know, China has brought up EDRA, so come on, give us solar technology, because China is very successful with solar. So I think it's not completely hopeless. There are things, and I think one of the main challenge of NGO is that we never say die. You know, even though it's no matter how thorough the situation is, we will still fight. We will still try to find some solution. You know, find some way out. So I guess everybody has to embody that kind of spirit. You know. Yeah. Yes, Adrian.
Can I just paste some positive news?
Yeah, sure.
So on the same slides that Hilary had shared, this long list of policies and initiatives by the Malaysian government should be applauded. Yeah. Well, Hilary will have. Yes, Malaysia is a land where we come up with very good policies, but some of these policies are best or one of the very progressive in the region. The only country with a Renewable Energy Act, with a FIT system in the region for a developing country. That should be applauded. With a green tech financial scheme, a government intervened with the financial market to provide structure to promote adoption of green technology. You know, we have a low carbon city frameworks where we want to develop sustainably because moving forward, we are getting more and more urbanized, more and more people are migrating into urban cities, and the government have this framework ready. But having said all this, you know, we have good policies, we have good things in place, but why are we still not seeing the results on the ground? Where is the gap? How often do you guys talk to your local councils? Do you know where your local councils are? Do you know who your aduns are? Do you know who are your members of parliaments are? The failure and the distance that we separate ourselves from the government, it's actually one of the biggest hinder to make all these plans into reality. I always say that we deserve the government we elected. If we stop engaging with the government, if we do not give them pressure or praise where they need it, they will do their own things and not respond to us. So I mean, plans are there, good plans. National climate change policy, renewable energy, electrification of our transport system. We have MRT 1, 2, and 3. You know, so many things. You know, but we need public participations. All of you should write a letter, talk to your government, and make this happen in the more just, proper, and have the best public engagement as much as possible. So yeah, it's not that gloom and gloom. Malaysia is actually not that bad, but we can always be better. Yeah.
Can I respond as an old man who's feeling very gloomy about things? Having had some experience trying to deal with all this as an activist in numerous capacities, it's one thing to have policies, it's another thing to enact them and to implement them. Cakap tak serupa bikin, as they say, right? And many times that has been the case. I do agree that you really need to know who your representatives are, you need to talk to them, and many people who are much younger, and even older people, for a long, long time have not attempted to do this, primarily because I think many feel just distant from or separated from the powers that be, and that's been they've been socialized into thinking that way, that you know, the Adons, MPs, we know best, the cabinet knows best, and you know, we'll make the decisions for you. When you've been trained or socialized into thinking that way, it's very difficult to break out of that. So it's not, and to say that we get the government we deserve implies that the whole system of democracy that one has is a clean system, yeah? That everybody has a way of, has an equal chance. And that is all fair, but of course, as one can see, it's not fair if you look at how the electoral boundaries, for example, yeah, are done up. There have been a lot of accounts of these things happening, right? And in many ways, the government does not say does not say that no, it doesn't happen. It does happen. So subsequently, I think it's nice to think about those happy things, yeah. But it's also necessary for us to be cautious about things and to be able to know the strategies and the ways and means to approach this kind of problems. Thank you.
Can I say something? Yeah. My name is Chan. I'm an ex-lecturer from Segi. I'm now going to be a student. Just 3 points I want to say about what I've gathered in today's session. The first is from this morning's session and right now, there seems to be, by the way, I'm a lecturer that teaches journalism. There seems to be a undue lots of roles and pressures being dumped on reporters on what they should do to tell stories of climate change. That is the perception that I get. How many of us today are reporters from the media, by the way? Anyone? 1, 2. I think when the two of you went through the Paris Agreement, I think the first thing that comes to your mind is, what the hell am I looking at? And I believe one of them is an intern from The Sun. And I have difficulty teaching these things to my students, very frankly. And I think we put too much social roles on journalists on what they should do to report about climate change, when, as Ms. Hilary has pointed out very clearly, the newsroom itself the newspapers, the alternative media, they are not interested in things like this at this time. And so I think that we should not put so much pressure on the journalists on what they should be reporting, how they should report it accurately, and so on and so forth, when a big part of that blame, so to speak, should be on the media owners, the editors who are making editorial decisions on what should be published in the media. That's number one. Number two, I agree very much with what Ms. Hilary said about media, training, about education. At this point in time, I've been teaching students for 7 years. They are definitely not trained to do things like this. They are not. It can be many reasons. Number one is they're not interested. Number two, they just want to have a job and get it over with. I think there is a need to really look at media education and how to teach students to ask questions. More often than not, at least my students with whom I have taught, they do not know how to ask questions simply because they are not taught to ask questions. And what Ms. Hilary said about teaching them national policies, teaching them how to read policies, and from there ask pertinent question, I think there is a need in doing some changes in the way we teach media education. That's number two. And number three is what is the word? I put it as the outlet to let people know about climate change. Telling stories, so we're talking about telling stories. I believe there is a need to look at, for example, coming up with our own publication in the internet. I know that, how many of you know this website called The Conversation? The conversation is actually a website where universities fund it, and universities churn out articles for that website. It is actually university-based journalism. And one of the primary objectives is actually to counter fake news, to counter propaganda with facts and figures. All right, so probably that is one avenue we can look at in talking about climate change and telling stories about climate change. But definitely, if we want to talk about telling stories, our journalists has to be trained to tell the stories. They're interested to tell the stories. If they are not, then I think we can talk all about the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, which even right now, my head is still very, where is the word, yeah? Very confused about those things. If I'm confused as a lecturer, how do you expect me to teach students about complex things like this and how to report things like this? All right, so I think there is a need to look at media education, I suppose. I think that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Hello? Yeah, just to add on towards the discussion, because this is something that I experienced really recently. I look after medias, and communicating in the same language is already challenging. Like, we're all speaking English, but not all of us understand each other. And we tend to forget that in Malaysia, our media covers different languages. So we work together with the Chinese press, we work together with the Indian press, right? And even the Malay media is huge. But how do we convey such complexity into like very big jargons into Malay translation? People come up to me and ask, what is circular economy in Malay, or what is carbon intensity in Malay? We give out press releases in English, but we expect them to write in their own language. So where is the fairness in that? So I think that those are like one of the challenges that we have to look at as well.
So, a very last question from Claire, and then we're gonna stop the session because we're behind the schedule. Sorry.
Thank you, dear. I just wanted to respond to this young man's point, because I think it's very valid. What you talked about, it's urgent and it's important. I think the question really is, we all need to come to a point where we answer this question. For things to change, who must change? I know it may sound philosophical, but that's the truth, all right? It's not, policy is important, changing policy and so on, but we also have to start with ourselves. So everyone has to be an ecological citizen. Every home has to be an ecological home. Our towns, our tamans, our villages, our cities, our university, your campus. What's your carbon footprint? That kind of thing. It starts here, right? If you want to read a manifesto, go to the Declaration for Climate Justice by the Global South, all right? There are many. The thing is that there is good news and bad news, so we shouldn't be afraid of gloom and doom, because these are facts. It is the reality. What Hilary has presented is the reality, all right? And reality is made up of good news and bad news. It's not a fight. The bad news is that this is a situation. The good news is that we are the last generation to be able to do something about it. All hope is not lost yet. Yes, it's very bad and it shouldn't have got this far, blah, blah, blah. We can't undo the past, but we can change the future. And each and everyone has to come to a point where he says, he decides, or I decide that I am going to do something. And the whole world doesn't rest on you, okay? So don't worry if you don't do it alone. But if you don't do it, then who will? And if not now, then when? All right? So make that decision today and commit to be doing something, whatever that is, whether you're recycling, whether you're talking to youth, whether you're fighting with policymakers, whether you're writing a story, do whatever you do best. All right, but do something and be an ecological person first before you go and try to change the government, change Trump, or whoever else you want to change, right? It might lead you there. You decide that advocacy is your field, but you got to walk the talk. And that kind of internalization is critical. What I see in you just now is what I see. I call it a wake-up moment, all right? Where I see that in people's eyes. It's serious, man. I got to do something, all right? And that is a very important point. I hope you don't sleep, because it means that you are waking up to the good news. And the bad news, the good news is that we have solutions. We have so many solutions, all right? It's out there. go out and find it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Ms. Hilary and everyone for engaging session. Next, we're gonna have a 10-minute, very short tea time break, and 15 now. Okay, 15. 15 it is. So the next session is gonna start at 4:35, I guess, and then you're more than welcome to bring your food in. It's laksa. So enjoy your food. Thank you.